Hey there guys, just stopping by to share another video lesson with you. So today we will be focusing on our review. Today is actually our laid back day. Today you have the opportunity to finish all your assigned work for the week. So if you haven't submitted the FRQ for Monday or the one that was assigned on Monday and was due on Wednesday, please go ahead and work on that and get it submitted. If you have not finished the one that was assigned to you on Wednesday that is due today, you still have until 11:59 p.m. today to get it submitted. However, if you are still running behind schedule and you need additional time to get it submitted, you could turn it in late. That's okay. I'm not going to subtract points or anything like that. But the time that is allotted or the time where it's due, it's 11:59 p.m. Aside from that, it'll be late. Now, so ladies and gentlemen, today I wanted to focus on research methods and experiments because we know for a fact that we will be tested on research methods and experiments. So the second question will be focusing on research methods and experimentation. So I want you to be very knowledgeable on this subject, and I want you to refresh your memory and get everything back into your working memory so that it is easier for you to perform on this exam. So let's go ahead and take care of this. And remember, you do have a modified schedule for next week and you have a modified schedule for the following week. If you have any questions in regards to that, please reach out to us. We are here to answer any questions, comments, or concerns, but you do have a modified schedule which will allow you to be able to take your AP exams throughout the days during those weeks. So you will only be testing 4 days out of those 2 weeks. So 4 days the first week and then 4 days the second week. Just keep that in mind and be ready for your exams. I have posted the schedule, so take a look at them. Write down the information on your calendars so you get used to using your organization skills as well for your university next year. So let's go ahead and talk about research methods and experimentation. So experiments, we all know what experiments are. Experiments are just required to confirm consistent, repeatable results. And in the West, experiments are required in nearly all cases to confirm the validity of psychological findings, particularly when it comes to cataloging and tracking behavior. Now, humans are first guided by their intuitions or the internal feelings or compulsions that we have. And scientific objectivity and research are required to root out our biases. So throw out our biases, throw out the intuition feels or feelings, and just simply focus on things that we can actually prove. So instead of going with instinct, always go with data analytics because it is more, it is just a lot better to talk about something or to prove something. So theories are necessary components of our experiments. So theories are explanations that organize observations and predict outcomes. And well, the theories is just like an idea that you have after you successfully put an experiment together. Then you put out a theory. So a hypothesis is a testable prediction related to a theory, confirmed or unconfirmed by the experiment. So a hypothesis is just simply the educated guess that you have before you conduct the experiment, and the theory comes right after the experiment. Now, operational definitions, these are just exact procedures of how things were done so that the experiment can be replicated. Does not matter if it was in FAR or in Germany or in Belgium, this experiment can be replicated regardless. So most psychological studies consist of observing human behavior, and certain factors are adjusted or controlled for scientists to wait and see change in thought or behavior from subjects. So a lot of the times in psychology, we focus on observable behavior or just observing the human condition to see what we can get out of it, get insight. So types of experiments, right? We have correlational studies. This is just how two factors are linked and how we can predict one more than the other. Now, however, correlations do not prove causation. For example, just because a school has less funding does not mean it causes low performance, although the two often come in tandem, but it is not true. Cross-sectional studies, on the other hand, are a type of observational study that analyzes data from a population or a representative subset. So with cross-sectional studies, for example, you just want to study, conducted maybe a study on males and females and ages of 24 through 35. So these two components, males and females, ages 24 to 35, would be a cross-sectional study that you are taking. So a longitudinal study is just simply observing research methods in which data is gathered for a subject or a group for a long period of time. So a longitudinal study would be used more for something like identity disorder. So just keep that in mind. Now, surveys. Surveys are just questionnaires. We all know that questionnaires they enable us to self-report, and they enable us to keep anonymity, so that way the survey can be conducted successfully. Naturalistic observations are just observations that we hold and that we don't tell people about or animals. We just simply record natural behavior. So observable behavior. And case studies. Now, case studies are just studies that we either take of one group or of an individual, and we study them in depth and in hopes of revealing some universal truth. So case studies. Now, experiments in groups, right? If you wish to see if zinc, for example, reduces common cold time, you need to conduct an experiment that tests the effectiveness of zinc on reducing common cold time. This requires splitting subjects into two groups to test your hypothesis. So you would have an experimental group, your group that is exposed to the treatment, and you would have your control group, the group that is not exposed to the treatment in an experiment. So additionally, in order to eliminate bias and interference by the experiment or the administrators, it's often best to take two groups unknown, called the double blind. So the double blind is a group in where both research participants and staff are unaware of which group has the placebo sugar pill and which has the treatment zinc. So both the researchers and the participants are blind to which pill is the actual pill, because the main researcher does not want to put any bias. So statistics and graphs. As data is collected across various populations and groups, there are primarily two, but more than two, types of graphs that are used to represent. So we have histographs or bar graphs. Bar graphs are typically used in a lot of research. And scatter plots. Scatter plots are just graph of clustered where we have two variables with a slope suggesting the relationship being either positive, negative, or if there's none. Okie doke. I'll get you some milky, buddy. Now, additionally, there are two ways which it is said that statistics are collected. So they are either collected in a descriptive manner or in an inferential manner. So a descriptive manner is just a numerical data used to measure a described characteristics of groups, while inferential statistics are used to infer or predict the future and the probability of something happening or being true of the population. Now, when we're starting to talk a little bit more about plots, right, you need to know that there's a left skew and that there's a right skew, right? Information could be skewed. For example, age and income have a correlation coefficient of 0.7, meaning that the older you are, the more likely you have a high income. Conversely, the weight of your car and your gas mileage have a correlation coefficient of negative 0.6, meaning that the higher the weight of your car, the less efficient your gas mileage is. So the graph that may have a positive skew, so this one right here, or also known as the right skew or a right distribution due to the long tail and the positive direction of the number line. It is essentially, or it just essentially means that the bulk of information on the graph is skewed to the right. And it's the same information true for the left skew, but we undergo the opposite way. It is not right skewed, but left skewed, and we call this a negative skew. So keep that in mind. Now, these are just examples of scatter plots. This is a positive correlation. This is a negative correlation. And here we have a no correlation between the variables that you're looking at. Now, some statistical terms that you do need to be aware of are the following. So you need to know what central tendencies are. The central tendencies are just these right here, these guys right here. So we have the mode, the mean, the median, the range, and the standard deviation. If you ever hear the term central tendencies, you just need to know and be aware that this regards the mode. The mode is the most frequent occurring score. The mean is the average of the score. And then the median is the middle score of the distribution after you have organized all your data set. The range is the difference between your highest and your lowest scores, and the standard deviation is simply a measure of how much scores vary around the mean. When we talk how much they vary among the mean, we're talking about this bell curve right here. So typically we have the standard average score right down the middle, and then we would have one standard deviation, two standard deviations, three standard deviations, and then our outliers. So when we're talking about how relatable the scores are, then we're talking about simply this, the bell curve. Awesome. So variables and validity. Variables. Each experiment has an independent and dependent variable, which you guys already know. Experimenters manipulate the independent variable, and the dependent variable is what they are trying to measure. So always keep that in mind. So for example, if the experimenter wanted to see if studying flashcards helped test scores, the flashcards would be the independent variable, and then the test results would be the dependent variable. The dependent variable is what they're trying to measure. That's what they want to know. The independent variable is what they're manipulating, what they're either using or not. So here we are seeing that the independent variable, once again, are the flashcards, and this impacts the dependent variable, the test scores. So other variables that you need to keep in mind for this chapter are variables called confounding variables. Confounding variables, for example, are undesired variables that can impact the data and unless controlled for skew and then ruin the research findings. So confounding variables cannot really be thought of. Confounding variables, a good example, if we go back to the example that we're using, in the flashcard experiment could be things like age, intelligence level, gender, socioeconomic status. These things we don't really know about the population and we cannot account for them, so they are considered confounding variables. However, the experimenter can control for some of these variables and attempt to minimize or eliminate the confounding variables through selection or design. So in other words, you just need to design accordingly and think about all possible confounding variables that you could face among your experiment, and then try to plan accordingly. So these, we also name this a controlled variable, or anything that remains constant and controlled by the experimenter. So once again, confounding variables can turn into controlled variables, but you still might have a few confounding variables that you might not thought of. So significance. When we talk about significance, regardless, experiments are always going to be judged, valued, or dismissed based on their significance or statistical significance. And statistical significance, all it is essentially is that it is the likely or probability that chance was not responsible for the results of a study. In other words, if confounding variables were minimized and eliminated, you are left with very essential pure experimental data, and the results from the experiment would be statistically significant as opposed to an experiment plagued by multiple confounding variables. When you are faced by multiple confounding variables that you did not take into account when you're setting up your experiment and you're actually undergoing the experiment, that it'll throw off everything and you really cannot go forward because you need to account for those confounding variables and turn them into controlled variables. So assignment and selection. When we talk about assignment selection, all we're talking about is when we're gathering the participants and when we're assigning the roles to the participants. So when we're randomly selecting, we're literally just randomly selecting people from a diverse population. And we need to take into account that we're randomly selecting from the major populations. So we need to have all ethnicities and populations taken into account in the study. So a representative sample must be randomly selected from a diverse population, and secondly, this randomly selected group should then also be randomly assigned to the experimental and control groups. The process of selection and assignment through a random system best ensures that there's no bias or lack of diversity in the experiment. So, for example, if I'm testing political beliefs, I would need to ensure I am polling all age groups and sexes as males, females, and various age groups tend to have certain political leanings. Now, men tend to lean slightly more conservative, women tend to lean more liberal, college-aged people tend to lean more left and drift slightly towards the right as they age. So, validity. In addition to needing it to randomly select your population and randomly assigning your assignments, a valid experiment needs a large sample size. Small sample sizes can produce inconsistent or anomalous results. So it is just better to always just have a very big population or a large sample size when conducting an experiment. So um, never stay away from having a large sample size. And thank you very much for stopping by and looking at this PowerPoint. Remember, guys, you will be testing